Hey guys, what's up? In this tutorial we're going to learn how to make a tic-tac-toe game using Python. So we're going to start by importing NumPy and generating a board as an array of essentially null values. So let's define our board with NumPy empty, shape of 3 rows and 3 columns, and the type of object, which is the most general type. So now we want this defined essentially an array of null values, and we want to replace those null values with just a space essentially, which we can fill in later with an X or an O. So we can replace the null values by iterating through each value in the board. So for our in range 3, for scene range 3, and then we're going to set each position board RC to space instead of null. So this is initializing our board. So we're going to wrap this in a function called initBoard. And then finally we're going to return our board so that we can see it. So in order to actually get our board, we're going to set board equals to initBoard. And then why don't we print our board so that we can see it. Okay, yeah, so as we expected, it just prints out a series of blank spaces, and we can later fill these in with actual values. But we can do that later. The next thing that we want to do is, now that we've initialized our board, is we want to actually draw it as a tic-tac-toe board. Right now it's just a bunch of spaces, but we want to actually draw it in a shape that's tic-tac-toe-like. So we can do that by defining another function called drawBoard and printing out each essentially piece, board RC, each piece, each 3x3 piece in our board. So we'll print out the first line by saying print board 0, 0 plus, and then a vertical separator because that's the first row of a tic-tac-toe board, plus board 0, 1 plus another vertical separator plus board 0, 2. So that's the first row of values in our board. And then we're going to want to print like a horizontal line because a tic-tac-toe board is a mix of vertical and horizontal lines. And then we can just essentially copy and paste this code for the other 2 rows of our board. So instead of 0 here, we're going to replace it with a 1 because it's the first or second row. And then we'll do that one more time. So like that, and then replace the 1s with 2s. So now we've actually printed our board, so it should look like a tic-tac-toe board. So why don't we try calling this method and see what we get. So instead of print board, we'll do draw board. And as we can see, it actually looks now like a tic-tac-toe board, which is what we wanted. So now all we have to do is replace the lengths with X's and O's. And how we're going to do that is we're going to enter a while loop, which is our game loop. And we're going to ask the players to enter in a row and column, and then we're going to actually place a piece where they indicated the row and column that they wanted their piece to go. So first we have to define a couple of variables. So why don't we define a turn? So turn is either 0 or 1, X or O. The piece is going to be X, so the starting piece is X. And we're going to set game over equal to false because at the start of the game obviously isn't over. And now we can enter our game loop. So we're going to say well, not game over. And then we'll write everything in here. So the first thing we're going to write is if turn equals 0. So if it's the first person's turn, then we're going to prompt them for a row and column in which to enter their piece. So row is input, and then we're going to write a message. So we'll say player 1 enter a row from 1 to 3. And then we'll do the same thing for column. So input player 1 enter a column from 1 to 3. And we have to wrap each of these in the int expression because input automatically saves it as a string, but we want the row and column to be integers. And we also have to subtract 1 because we're asking from 1 to 3, but the computer interprets it from 0 to 2. So we'll just subtract 1 to make that adjustment. And then we can copy and paste the same code for turn equals to 1, except we'll just change the input messages so that it's player 2. So player 2 enter a row, player 2 enter a column. Okay, and then the next thing that we're going to do is we are going to check that the row and column that they actually entered, that's a valid place to put a piece, because if a piece is already there, then obviously it's not a valid location. So we'll write another method to check that. So we're going to say def is empty, and we're going to pass in the row and column to check if that position is empty, and we're going to say return board row column equals to blank. So essentially what this code does is it looks at the position that we indicated, and if it's equal to blank, then there isn't a space there, so it is empty and it's a valid location. And then otherwise it'll return false because the piece actually is there. So it'll essentially check whether that space is empty. So now, given that method, we can come back to our while loop and we can say while not is empty row column. So if the position that the player entered is not valid, then we're going to print not a valid move and try again. And then we can actually prompt the user again to enter in their own column. So we'll just copy and paste this code into our while statement. So we'll just ask the user to enter in these values again until it's a valid location. That's the purpose of the while loop. So now that we know that the row and column that the user entered is a valid location, we can actually draw the board. But we have to actually update the board with the player's move. So let's write that function. So we'll write a function called update board. And we'll pass in the row and column that the user indicated, and also the piece that in either the X or O. So we're going to just say board row column. We're going to set that equal to the piece, and then we don't have to return anything. We're just updating the board. So we've updated the board, and now we can actually draw the board. So why don't we do those two steps here? So before we draw the board, we'll want to update it here. So update board. Okay, good. So row column piece. So the next thing that we want to do is alternate the turns, because if right now the turn is equal to 0, so that would just mean that player 1 keeps going every time, but we obviously want the other player to go once they've entered a valid move. So we can alternate the turns by saying turn plus equals 1, and then turn equals turn modulo 2. And what those two lines of code will do is essentially switch the turn between 0 and 1 indefinitely. So that's really good. And then we also want to switch the pieces, obviously, because the players have different pieces. So we'll say if piece equals to X, then we'll set it to O. And otherwise, then we'll set the piece equal to x because it was O then previously. Okay, good. So we've alternated the turns and the pieces, and now why don't we try to check this to see if it works. Alright, so it asks us to enter a row, so let's enter 1, and it asks us to enter a column, so let's also enter 1. So as we can see, it places an X in the first row and first column, so that's really good. Let's see if it does the same for player 2. So let's say 1 and 2, and as you can see, it works. It places the O in the first row and second column, so that's good. Let's also check that if we try to place the X in row 1, column 1, it returns an error like it should. So, oops, I said 2, so let me try again. Okay, so let's try to place the O in row 1 and column 1. So good, it says not a valid move, try again, because obviously row 1, column 1 is not a valid move, there's already an X there. So yeah, it looks like our code is working properly. We haven't implemented the 3 in a row, so it's not going to say like you win if I enter an X in this third position, but let's implement that now. So I'm going to stop that running, and now we're going to go back up, and we're going to define a check win function, which checks if there's 3 pieces in a row, and then updates the appropriate message. So let's define that function. We're going to say def check win, and we're going to check for if there's 3 pieces in a row. So we're going to pass in the piece variable. So let's first check if there's a horizontal 3 in a row. So we're going to check the horizontal, and the way we're going to check this is we're going to iterate through all the rows for R in range 3, and we're going to check if each column has that piece in it. So if board R0 equals has the piece, and board R1 has the piece, and board R2 has the piece, then we're going to return true because we're trying to check for the win. So it's saying yes, that player won. And then the next thing that we're going to do is we're going to check the vertical. So for C in range 3, and basically this is going to be similar to the horizontal, except instead of R we're going to use C equals the piece, and board 1 C equals the piece, and board 2C equals the piece. Then we're going to return true. And finally we're going to check the diagonals. So there are 2 diagonals we need to check, the main diagonal and the other diagonal. So the main diagonal will say if board 0, 0 equals to the piece, and board 1, 1 is equal to the piece, and board 2, 2 equals the piece, then the main diagonal is filled with a certain piece and the game has been won. Similarly, we'll check the other diagonal, and this time it's going to be if board 0, 2 equals to the piece, and board 1, 1 equals the piece, and board 2, 0 equals the piece. Then the other diagonal is filled and will return true because the game has been won in that case. So we've done that. So we've checked for the wins. Now we need to implement it in our while loop. So after we update the board, we're going to check for the win, and we're going to say if check win piece. If it's true when the game has been won, we're going to set game over equal to true, and we're going to print that player, whoever player placed the piece, wins. So we're going to say player blank wins, and then we'll replace that blank with so it's going to be turn plus, it's going to be whose ever turn it is but since turn is 0 or 1, we want it to be 1 or 2, so we'll say turn plus 1. So that should work. That should check for the win and print, exit the for loop, because we set now game over equal to true, but also print player wins message. So yeah, why don't we test that out, try to get 3 in a row. Okay, so I'm gonna enter 1, 1. Okay, and then for player 2, I'll just enter it in the center. Okay, and then I'll get 3 in a row horizontally for X. So let's do 1, 2. Okay, and then I'll do player 2 is 2, 1. Alright, and then player 1 will be 1, 3. Okay, so we got 3 in a row for X, and we have player 1 wins, so that's good. It got the horizontal, and it said that player 1 wins, so now it's checking 3 in a row. So yeah, that's all there is to the tic-tac-toe game. If you like this video, be sure to give it a subscribe and a like, and we'll be posting more videos soon.